Thank you, George, and thank you, Dr. Alice, for setting the stage for the next session of discussion in such a great way. I can't see. Oh, you're here, Dr. Ali. Great. So the next session is still a continuation of the policy discussion, and we are going to be delving into the policy making process for air quality management in East Africa. And we'll also hear some global perspectives around the science policy interface with a case study from India. So for this session, myself and my colleague Andriana are going to co-chair. Andriana is joining us online today. And just to get rolling, when we talk about air quality policy making in East Africa, unlike, for example, in the US, where air quality has been legislated and regulated since the 1970s, it is a fairly new affair in East Africa. For example, up till the mid-90s, and in some countries in East Africa up to the early 2000s, the kind of environmental policies, legislations that we had were more oriented towards conservation. So natural resource conservation, like soil conservation, forest conservation, wildlife conservation, etc. So pollution and environmental protection laws and policies only came about in the mid-90s up to early 2000s. So Uganda, for example, was the first having their national environment law around the year 95. But for some reason, and I know this is going to come in the discussion, there is still no national air quality law in Uganda till now. Kenya's law came about in the year 1999, but we didn't have air quality legislation until the year 2014. For our neighbors, Tanzania, the environment law came about in 2004. In 2007, we had an air quality management regulation with some standards in place. Implementation is another story for another day. Our neighbors up north, Ethiopia, they were also some of the early racers. So in 2002, they did what they called an environmental, a pollution control proclamation. 2009, they did what they called guideline air quality standards, which basically picked the interim guidelines of the World Health Organization at that point in time. Again, implementation, a story for another day. So to take us forward, we do have an amazing panel of distinguished ladies who are going to take us through this session. And I would like to hand it over now to Andriana to introduce our first speaker, and then she'll continue introducing the others. So over to you, Adriana.
Thank you very much, Jerry. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Great. Dr. Alice Kaudia, I was shouting and waving for you, at you from here. I am here. And it was great to listen to you as you took us through your opening remarks. And I would also like to acknowledge, Dr. Alice, there's many authors that you're sitting with in that room that contributed to the assessment. So I hope you get a chance to say hello in person and have a cup of tea, because the assessment has been largely conducted online due to the COVID restrictions. So it's an ample opportunity to be able to do that. But without much ado, I'd like to introduce this very interesting panel that we have to talk about air quality policy making. And these speakers actually are involved in one way or another in the policy making arena. So we are very privileged to start off with Selela Okoth. Selela Okoth has been working at the National Environment Management Authority in Kenya for over 10 years in various capacities. She's currently serving as a Principal Compliance and Enforcement Officer in charge of air quality, ozone depleting substances, and petroleum units at the authority. She holds a Master's of Science in Urban Environmental Planning and Management and a BSc in Environmental Science from Maseno University. She's currently pursuing a PhD in Environmental Policy at the University of Nairobi. Her research interests are in areas of environmental policy within developing countries where the environmental challenges have not been addressed through appropriate policy frameworks. Specifically, she's interested in the management of end-of-life vehicles. So, Selela, please proceed. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Yeah, today there's a change. There was too much research yesterday, and I was asking if it is purely research oriented, because some of the methodologies or findings were in a different language that some of us are not familiar with. So today I'll speak, I think I'll call it English because it's something known to us. We might not be interacting with it in our everyday lives, but I think the language will be much more simpler, not with a lot of scientific jargons per se. As you've heard, I work for the National Environment Management Authority. I started working in this air quality space in the year 2020. And it's been an awesome experience. I think I've interacted with quite a number of people in this room. And it's been a worthwhile journey, and I still look forward to more of this, because when I start something, I tend to have a dream about it, and I would want to see what we'll achieve by the end of the day regarding air quality management in Kenya. So I'll be very brief as he opens the slide. I don't know whether Jerry is counting already my time. Okay. What I'll do is just to probably let you appreciate where we are, what we've been able to do, where we are as a country, and what we look forward to in terms of air quality management. So this will inform our outline. We'll briefly talk about the status of air quality management in Kenya, and what have we been able to do to have this policy in place. I think it's good to share this background. What have been our milestones, what are our current challenges, and what we propose as interventions to steer this ship going forward. So when we were having a conversation yesterday, I was telling a group that I was meeting in some of the group sessions yesterday that on Monday, you could hardly see the city of Nairobi. The CBD was in some fog that you could not see anything. That was on Monday morning. And that is basically what I share on that photo up there, because it's a reality that we have been experiencing over the years, especially when there is, when we are having either heavy rains or cold seasons in the country. If you are driving from Mombasa, you can see that you cannot see the city very well because there is a lot of smog somewhere. For us, our common sources, and I think that has been talked by Dr. Alice Kaudia when she was covering this, we have cases of motor vehicle emissions, industrial emissions, open burning, very common, And in Kenya, our unique one is tire burning, done by street families, very early in the morning or in the evening, because the value they derive from the steel that is used for making the tires, they sell it for scrap metal, and I think it fetches a fairly good price. Then we have household combustion. Majority still depend on fuel wood or charcoal, and I think she alluded to that in her presentation. And our key pollutants are issues to do with the particulate matter. And VOC is that every other Kenyan in general, that is the general public, who calls NEMA says there is a smell. So for them, majority still think that just the smell is air pollution. So when they call and we take our equipment there, we realize that the volatile organic compounds are actually too high. That is very common in Kenya. Ozone, not so bad, but the other challenge is nitrogen dioxide and sulfur oxides. The legal framework has been in place, and we have the Framework Law on Environment, that is the Environmental Management and Coordination Act of 1999, and has been operationalized by the Air Quality Regulations of 2014. So if you look at the Framework Law on Environment, we have several sections there, 78 to 82 that talked about requirements for regulation of air quality and requirement for standards, licensing of facilities that cause pollute, and etc. So in terms of what do our regulations speak about, the scope is on stationary sources and mobile sources. And in that regard, the regulations have provisions for national ambient air quality standards, and we also have set parameters and the regulatory limits for various sources, stationary or mobile for that matter. And in terms of just appreciating what do we do then to implement these regulations, we request or we require quarterly stack emission reporting, source emission reporting from industrial facilities. And this is the basis that we have largely relied on when we are doing monitoring for industrial emissions. Thereafter, we also we do licensing for these facilities. And it's based on the stack emission reports that we do receive. So going by that, a decision then is made whether to license or not to license, or even if we are to license, we have what we call provisional licensing. In this particular context, is if the applicant has not met the set threshold, and we agree on what we call a compliance plan, emission compliance plan, which sets some commitment by the industry on what they intend to do to meet the set threshold, and within what framework and budgetary lines, because that is part of the commitment we want to see. And I think over the years, we've reached a situation that we are now targeting individual facilities who do not meet that particular commitment. So we are no longer licensing certain facilities until they've actually complied with that commitment they gave us. So that is how we are walking that compliance journey with industries. When coming to mobile sources, we have not rolled out this particular regime. What we've been able to do is that this is a very consultative process. We needed each other. We have the National Transport Safety Authority, we have Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, we have the Kenya Airports Authority, Kenya Civil Aviation. We have many, many players in this particular context. And we sat down as a task force. We have been working on this. One, we have now developed a designation criteria for vehicular emission testing centers. And I've categorically talked about vehicles because we are not targeting the ships, we are not targeting the aircrafts at the moment. We want to roll it in a staggered approach to learn from the starting point. So this one is basically to bring on board players in this particular industry, and we are targeting private players. Then the regulators remain to do the oversight role. So what we have done also is that we are aware that we had Kenya standards that actually had the exhaust emission limits But this is a matter that is pending in our court because vehicle importers were not agreed to meet those particular standards. But then there was an opportunity that the East African community agreed on harmonized standards, the EAS 1047, that we are going to use to roll out this. So we have already communicated to the public, and we are progressing this agenda. So as it is today, we have received what we call the expressions of interest, and we are starting to review this for a decision, because we are saying that we must work to reduce these emissions from vehicular transport system. So in terms of what it took us to make this policy, one is to appreciate that, of course, we have the Constitution of Kenya that gives a right to a clean and healthy environment for all people in the country. That is Article 42. That has been our strength in this. Of course, we do appreciate that we also have our National Environment Policy of 2013 that has very clear policy statements on air quality in the country, that talks about air quality standards that should be put in place. It talks about motorized transport, clean energy, and many other things that support reduction of air pollution from these targeted sources. So with the framework law on environment, we have then operationalized the same, and we have the environmental management and coordination air quality regulations of 2014. And in putting these regulations in place, I've talked about the existence of several standards, including ambient air quality standards for controlled and non-controlled zones. We have largely relied on World Health Organization guidelines. We did not have baseline when we were making these particular standards. That still seems to be the problem, and I'm happy to see potential partners that can support NEMA in this particular process, because we are currently reviewing our air quality regulations, and it would be prudent that when we do this review, it is informed by data and not rather purely relying on World Health Organization guidelines. For industrial emissions, we largely relied on IFC standards that informed what we have used to set the threshold for various parameters. Let me quickly move to gaps. We still have a lot of technical gaps in the regulations, and I think I've talked about the issues of baseline data. There are requirements for air dispersion modeling. Unfortunately, as the regulations speak about it, it's for existing facilities. But I'm happy to report here we've amended that administratively, and we are now asking for new facilities that, as they submit the environmental impact assessment reports, if they are within the regime, then they must undertake air dispersion modeling reporting to us to inform the decision. We have major legislative gaps in the regulations. How we define the roles of lead agencies, I think there are cases where we give other agencies more work that belong actually to us. There is a delay in rollout, as I've already talked about that. We are still working to enhance our capacity. I think today we are here in this room, 3 of us. There is Marcella, who heads laboratory for air quality. There is Jilani that works with me in air quality. So those are my colleagues, and we are here to also benefit from what we can get from this in terms of capacity building. We have had cases, and actually this is our greatest enforcement challenge, that yes, we have our monitoring lab that you've seen on the first slide, the mobile air quality lab. It has the capacity to do measurements for ozone, NOxes, PM 2.5, PM 10, hydrocarbons, among others. But we have a challenge that we cannot narrow down and say it's facility X or Y. So when we get data, it doesn't give us conclusive information. So in as much as we have had these cases we would want to deal with conclusively, we are not able to, as things are today, because we cannot communicate on who is exactly the polluter. You might find that edible oil companies, they are close to each other. So when we do our monitoring, the data we receive combines both these facilities. So how will you say it is facility X or Y? Those are things we have to deal with. We've not done adequate monitoring. We only have that mobile equipment. You know, we need to have continuous data collection to inform a decision. We have not been able to do mapping to identify which one are our non-attainment zones and what is our management plan to address those challenges. Low level of awareness, I think I've spoken to that. Issues of funding, of course, they can never be adequate. And we have never worked on air quality management strategy. And I think that is a huge gap that we have as a nation. We don't know where to start with, where to start from. In terms of a milestone, I think where we started, our capacity was quite low. And I must say that these small interactions that people might not see the value in, some of us have gotten the value. Because I think my role is way better in terms of air quality than I was before I joined air quality space. We have very good strategic partners in this particular space, and I want to recognize our partnerships with the World Resources Institute, more in capacity building, and because they are focused in the city of Nairobi, we can see that we are heading in the right direction when it comes to improving the air quality within the city. I'm also happy to say that our leadership at the authority has given this as a priority. I think just before I came here, we were prioritizing the need to roll out emission testing from motor vehicles, and I think that's something they've assigned a specific budget to see it work. And the ministry, the National Treasury, has a draft green fiscal incentives policy framework. I think this will be a great way forward in terms of addressing our biggest challenge of emissions. Because when you go to investors and you tell them you need to have a new pollution control technology, they tell you the cost is too high. And with this particular policy framework, our expectation is that the government will actually make it affordable by probably removing taxation that is also very costly and support introduction of green technology in the country. I think there is already recognition for electric vehicles. It has taken off. The city county government is very keen also on a motorized transport system. And if you were to walk in the city, maybe tomorrow you will see that there's something different if you've been in Kenya before. So what do we think can help us as a country, as a regulator? We are still seeing how to strengthen our capacity. We need capacity building and development. The policy and science dialogue cannot stop. It has to continue. We have discussed this with various players in this particular space, and we have agreed that we must put in place an air quality management strategy. The requirements for equipment, we've talked about in these various forums, and I think that will help us, because when you listen to other jurisdictions, they're actually protecting their people, because even if they don't have the reference monitors, they have the local sensors. And they're able to advise their people that it is not safe, stay indoors, because this is the reading that you are getting for PM and ETC. And that is something that I think is not as costly. I think we've had these bilateral discussions, and it was interesting to note that air could actually give us even an app. And I think as government, if we were to approach even Safaricom to make it available to every Kenyan that has a Safaricom line, that this app can be made available, I don't think that is too much to ask for from a partner like Safaricom or Airtel. The community of practice has also been important to some of us. I think we are gaining some knowledge there. I think emission testing from mobile sources, I think I've talked about that. We need to enhance our air quality monitoring, and I think regulations review, I've talked about that. And how to deal with non-attainment zones. We still have data, but we have that suspicion that we have highly polluted zones within the country, and we need to address that. And as I wind up, I just want to probably share some thoughts that we have some opportunities to strengthen our support for policy and behavior change. Can we try to start thinking, because I know there is a lot of research, especially in the air quality space, a lot of research has been done and is still ongoing. can we see how to create this balance and support also police, because the action is really needed. Can we also try and reduce this linear focus on air quality and see how we can integrate? Dr. Alice talked about this largely, about climate change and air quality management. There is a very strong relationship. When you address one, there is a response to the other. And I know that climate change has a lot of funding. Do we have any opportunities to see how can this be integrated for the interest of air quality management? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Selela. So I'll ask you to hang around for just a couple of questions, if there are any quick burning ones. We are also going to have a longer discussion session after this, after all three presentations, but I'll start with Robert and then Alex and Dr. Kaudia. If we can have the last one from the politician, those four, and then we move to the next presentation.
I never see the politicians getting the last word. That's good. Thank you for that presentation. It was excellent. It was very strategic. I appreciated your comprehensive assessment of different measures and how to move them forward. And I was just going to ask, it resonates with some of the work we've been doing at HEI, and whether there are opportunities for the dialogue that you talked about that was key. And one of them on transport is a major report we just released on the health effects of traffic-related air pollution. It's looked at over 700 studies around the world, and has great detail, and is very relevant to some of the changes that you're seeking. And the second, and that might be useful in terms of urban traffic. The second one is a suite of studies that looked at extremely low levels of air pollution in several parts of the world that found effects below many standards that may be helpful for you in terms of setting a new ambient air quality standard for Kenya, and whether a workshop or policy dialogue around those two pieces with other people certainly coming to present evidence might be helpful in terms of moving that agenda forward.
Thank you, and kindly take those before the next ones, lest you forget.
I think there are suggestions that I think we highly welcome, and I think we can have this conversation in terms of how to have more dialogue, and these publications or documentation that we already have, because we have started the review of the regulations, and I think one hitch is to get data to inform the ambient air quality standards. Number two is that we need to talk to our politicians, and I think that was the question that George had, and Dr. Kaudia handled it. We need to show them that actually prevention is where they need to put their investment in, rather than handling treatment cases on matters of air quality. So we need this data to, when we face them, because soon we'll be talking about this to them, what is our data to show them that we need to rethink our strategy? Yeah.
Thank you. Alex, very quickly.
Thank you. I know that Kenya implements a decentralized policy with county governments. So, and NEMA is national level. So most times, in most countries, we tend to have things being very sweet and working out at a national level, because definitely as an authority, most likely you have a vote directly from government, from consolidated fund, and maybe you're better facilitated compared to county governments. So I'm wondering whether this process has been operationalized at lower levels, if that is supposed to be the case, because my assumption is that whether you're regulating the implementation and operationalization of all these regulations is supposed to happen at county governments and lower level governments. And if that is not the case, then how is NEMA handling, for instance, the issue of air quality management nationally, assuming the mandate still stays with you?
Great question, Alex. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, NEMA is better equipped currently than the county government. They have a role, yes, in air quality management. I think what we've been able to do over the years, and that goes beyond just the air quality regime, is that our framework law on environment talks about coordination, and NEMA largely works with lead agencies. In this particular context, we largely work with the county government. The other good thing is that for all the 47 counties in Kenya, NEMA is fully represented because we have decentralized our functions at within all the counties in Kenya, and we work together with our county governments. One other thing that we also do is we have a specialized course on enforcement that all our county officers dealing with matters of environmental protection are taken through and gazetted. So basically, when there is need to do monitoring or any form of inspection on matters of air quality, we do it jointly as a team. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Kaudia, you had a hand up.
And Jerry, don't forget that we have some questions online as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Selela, for that great presentation. I just want you to expound on the concept of airsheds so that there's a clearer understanding. I know you know where I'm coming from. These airsheds.
So I'll ask that you take that together with Madam Politician's last word here.
Thank you, Jerry. You earlier mentioned about the East African integration they came up to accept about the road transport emissions and stuff. So in your milestone, you had an integration of electric vehicles to non-motorized transport. I don't know, as at the national level, have you gone far deep on the local path? How are you going to do this? How is it going to be incorporated in your policies and the research? What has it come about?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you. When I talk about airshed, in our regulations, we speak about the need to have do some kind of assessment for various zones within the country, because there are certain suspect cases of highly polluted areas, and those are called normally non-attainment zones. So there is need to have a specialized air management strategy for those particular zones to see how we can return them to compliance levels or how to deal with those very difficult situations. So when we talk about this aspect of airshed, is that those should be those identified areas that require management plans to address the non-attainment areas, like the parameters that are above the ambient air quality standards, and how then do we make sure that we come back to the acceptable standards. Yeah. The EAS, this of course sets the exhaust emission, vehicular exhaust emission limits that East African countries are actually going to use. But then when I talked about non-motorized transport, this is actually a key policy consideration in the National Environment Policy, and several government agencies, the Ministry of Energy, the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, are actually working to have this particular kind of innovations and technology embraced within Kenya. So what they have been able to do, I think there has been very good support for people who are assembling electric vehicles in the country. And Kenya has been able to commission, they're actually running within the city today. They might not be in other cities except Nairobi, but it's something that has categorically taken off. I think like in the last month of early this year, I think we've seen a lot of commissioning going on within the country, including what we call the three-wheeler, the tuk-tuk. We are also now having the electric ones within the city. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Adriana, take it away for the questions from our online participants. And after that, you may proceed to introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jerry. I ask for indulgence that we can do the next speaker because she's due to go somewhere else. She has another meeting. So we'll do the next speaker now, and then we'll take the online questions will take preference as we move on to the question and answer session.
Thank you.
So if that's okay, then, and also for Selela, I think just to inform you, those in the room know that there was an air quality strategy draft a few years ago, and I'm wondering, I guess the question to the ministry is what happened to that, but I guess we can follow up that with a bilateral after this session. So without much ado, I'd like to introduce, moving from Kenya to India, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kalpana Balakrishnan. Dr. Kalpana is actually from India, but just to give you her very impressive experience and expertise, she obtained her undergraduate degree from the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi, and subsequently she became a doctor. She subsequently did her doctoral and postdoctoral training at the Johns Hopkins University in the US. She's a leading global environmental health scientist in India. She's spearheading research and academic efforts in the areas of health effects of air pollution and chemical risk assessment. She has contributed to several national and international technical assessments concerned with air quality, including the global burden of disease and comparative risk assessments, ARC monographs, and global energy assessment, as well as help to develop the World Health Organization air quality guidelines and work with the India state level burden of disease initiative. So Dr. Kalpana, I would like to welcome you to do your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariana. Can you hear me? Is the audio all right? All right. Okay, thank you so much. I apologize for letting you know that I need to go. I didn't plan for the delays and I couldn't push my meetings here. Thank you very much to the organizers for this opportunity to talk to a group of researchers and policymakers in a region that I have had very little opportunity to know about. So it's a great privilege to be amongst all of you. I wish I could be there in the room with you. And while I was listening and I was thinking, what could I say in my presentation that would resonate? Of course, I've had the privilege of working with several researchers from your region, and I kind of knew that this would resonate. But after listening to Dr. Cordia and also the NEMA presentation just now, it seems like there is so much commonality with what we are struggling with across the board in many parts of the global south, that I could replay the tape for our policymakers and our researchers for India or South Asia, and it would sound exactly the same things that have that beg consideration for attention to move the momentum on air quality actions. So today I was asked to speak on a particular case of using satellite-based methods for policy making and the lessons learned from India, and I will do so, but do hope to sort of, make this a much broader case than just for satellite-based methods. The issues seem to be very, very similar. What we need to sort of really strengthen the evidence base. So I'm going to start sharing my screen just now. I hope you can see the slides.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Right, just a second. All right. So I think the very first point I wanted to sort of make is what Dr. Kaudia was saying. This nexus or this need to integrate between energy development and air pollution. And I think the pictures on either side from India would very much resonate with any of the countries that are represented there in this meeting. That we have air pollution resulting from underdevelopment and unorganized development that are sort of, challenging us to sort of look at, we do want to move and push the button on development. We can't quite get all the organization that is needed for our cities and our powerhouses to sort of produce all the energy that they need in a clean manner. And at the same time, we have a lingering burden. And if you're looking at countries of the size of India, we are looking at the size of continents elsewhere. We are looking at, roughly about 600 million plus people in the rural areas being exposed to the hazards of solid cook fuels. And the story that Dr. Kaudia related was, I wish, we could have her relate the story to many, many policymakers because unlike her, who was grown up in a home, not experiencing the real hazards and therefore sort of can really relate to it. Many of our policymakers seem to sort of have forgotten that part of their history, or perhaps they have not experienced it themselves. But to sort of look at primarily air quality management being focused only on the urban cities, and for sources that are far removed from the residential cook fuel sector. So what I wanted to sort of really focus today on, how can we sort of move the agenda on creating healthy, seamless breathing spaces, underscore seamlessness, not just between administrative boundaries, but between rural and urban areas, not just between states, not just between districts or blocks, but between indoor and outdoor environments, between rural and urban populations, between exposures for children and women and those that are experienced by the working populations. So this is, as you can recognize, for a country of the size of India, this is not an easy thing to do. And when you have, a regulation that is fairly mature, now it's almost 30 plus years old, of requiring ambient air quality monitoring, everywhere in the country to be complied with, we still have a situation in which we have, monitors at a density far less than what is really needed to inform population level exposures. Here you have some data that shows that if we were to sort of really achieve the required ambient air quality ground level monitor density at par with what is really needed to reconstruct population level exposures, we would be requiring a situation wherein we would have to literally require an investment of about $1 billion US. Currently, we have a disproportionately distributed network of reference grade monitors. Most of the monitors are actually manual monitors, with the continuous ambient air quality monitoring stations being added relatively recently, with a mean distance to the nearest monitor of about 80 kilometers. And underscore the point that virtually, I would say not virtually, all continuous ambient air quality monitoring stations on the ground and all the manual monitors are currently located in urban sites. So already you can begin to see the justification on why we need other types of monitoring methods that are agnostic to the rural-urban divide. We can't possibly be sort of only looking at urban sites being the ones that are experiencing the worst, air pollution exposures. And in fact, right now, we recognize residential cook fuel sectors to be contributing to ambient air quality, in a major way. And despite this, we have a situation right now wherein the ambient air quality monitoring network cannot provide population representative exposure data, and and despite this situation, but for the amount of emphasis that was laid on health impacts of air pollution by the GBD project and by the initiatives of HEI to generate the State of the Global Air Report. Shown here is data from 2019, where we recognize that ambient and household air pollution exposures contribute equally to population level exposures. These are, of course, modeled estimates from the global exercise that sort of makes use of much more than ground level monitoring data. So when these estimates started coming out, we had a situation in which, we as researchers were being challenged. Where did this data come from? Did the data from the Central Pollution Control Board get included in these models for ambient air pollution that are primarily based on satellite-based data or chemical transport based models? And to add fuel to the fire, when we have air pollution being responsible for a very large health impact, equally distributed between household and ambient, air pollution of nearly 1.67 million deaths being attributed, that even increases the sensitivity even more. Are these models even good enough for India when we don't have when we don't have the rural areas being covered? Or, how well have the satellite data been ground truth by the ambient air quality regulatory monitoring network? So this was the situation just about 5 years ago when the GPD results started coming out and the India state level disease burden estimates were published, wherein WHO and the GPD group was asked to do quite a bit of explaining on how did we really make sure that this data was representative. And added to this challenge was that if we were to go, if we are going to get air pollution any attention compared to the other traditional health risk factors, that the Ministry of Health is already working on, whether it's high blood pressure, tobacco, or dietary risks. We had quite a bit of explaining to do, where how did these impact estimates come about so high for air pollution, and critical, of course, for these high levels of health impacts are high and ubiquitous levels of exposures, compared to the counterfactual that the GPD process used for air pollution, and therefore ground truthing the exposure data was of paramount importance for us if we are to get the Ministry of Health and other stakeholders responsible for actions or raising the voice on air quality actions on a health basis. And the other point that was also necessary for considering a satellite-based model was the fact that I think Dr. Kaudia and the previous speakers mentioned about airsheds. Airsheds are not unique to the African continent. It is unique to every geography. It is a necessity for every geography. And shown here are airsheds attributable to particular sources. And you can clearly see that the residential biomass contributes to the most populous Indo-Gangetic plain up here in the and western parts of the country, while coal predominates the southern and the eastern belts, and desert dust predominates the western part of the country. So when you have a situation of air sheds being dominated by particular sources, and you have an ambient monitoring, air quality monitoring network on the ground that focuses on the high priority cities or the most populous cities in the urban areas, we are in no way well positioned to sort of really answer the question on air quality actions directed at these sources going to impact the air sheds, because you might have an action on coal upstream in the eastern part of the country, but we are going to see the impacts in Chennai, but there is no way we will be able to really relate to the spatio-temporal resolution required unless we have a method that is high resolution and simultaneously able to provide data across the country, despite the supposed lack of precision or despite the potential biases. And we have, while the National Clean Air Program was already beginning to roll out, we have, and we had multiple sectoral interventions that are already identified by the National Clean Air Program. We were in a unique situation wherein we required hybrid, exposure models that would allow us to really look at, how can we monitor the efficacy of air quality actions. So in a pioneering piece of work that has been done by colleagues at IIT Delhi, Professor Sadmeet Day and his team, what has now been accomplished is that to address all these concerns of the satellite-based data being used together with ambient air quality monitoring data, available data that is throughout the country, we now have data from 2000 onwards that interfaces the ground level ambient air quality monitoring data together with satellite-based aerosol optical depth data, and as you can and this data has been utilized from the regulatory network, and as you can see, the agreement between the AOD data and the ground level data has improved significantly from many earlier years that you may have seen the data from, and this agreement between the satellite-based methods and the ground level monitoring network now matches the levels that are often found in developed countries. So this has been a major milestone accomplished by the research community here, and what was also pointed out, I think, by Dr. Kaudia was that the data needs to be accessible, and if you're going to be using satellite-based data that can be used even by early career researchers, the data has to be accessible and has to be a credible source of data that the regulatory agencies will accept. And so this data will now be hosted by the Central Pollution Control Board and disseminated through a portal. And this data, as you can see, is a 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer ambient PM2.5 database for India over 2 decades. And so this has been a major milestone for us, wherein we have been able to sort of really interface a ground level ambient air quality monitoring data with AOD-based methods. And therefore, it has allowed us to sort of really use it for many, many purposes that I will illustrate over the next 5 minutes or so. It has allowed us to sort of really look at, we have made very limited gains in the rural and urban areas over the last 2 decades, using these particular estimates, it has allowed us to sort of tabulate daily exceedances in the National Clean Air Program era, that the number of, thanks to the initiatives, the National Clean Air Program, it does seem like the daily exceedances is, progressively decreasing in the recent years, which is good news. And it might be, clearly you need data such as the satellite-based estimates that can sort of really profile the entire country at the high levels of resolution that are needed before you can sort of even, before you can sort of attribute it to particular actions. And then we have been able to, we have plans now to use this for airshed-based, modeling that can be done, for hotspot modeling, such as, what is being done in the National Capital Region, for mapping it against environmental carrying capacity, the maps that you are seeing on the top right panel and the bottom panel of the Delhi National Capital Region. And it is also going to allow us to prioritize network expansion. Where should we be adding monitors? We clearly can't afford $1 billion to have the monitoring density network, and it's probably not the best use of money to sort of really do that. And it has also been possible now to use the prospective and the retrospective 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer data in multiple health studies, as is being done globally across many other countries, including the developed countries, where all of the skepticism around the satellite data is slowly beginning to sort of go away with greater and greater ground truthing and greater documentation of the ability to address the biases in these methods, and the value of such satellite-based methods for health impacts, which have been sort of difficult to come by, across the country for in the time frame that the policymakers are asking it to be produced. Just a couple of reflections on while this has been all on the satellite-based methods for exposure models, simultaneously there has been a lot of progress in country in exposure and exposure response assessments. The country has a huge database on personal exposures, microenvironmental exposures, rural exposures, urban exposures in multiple microenvironments, using pretty much every technology that has been used elsewhere in the world, from carrying to wearing personal exposure measurement devices has become a reality now, even for the most difficult populations, the rural populations, the rural women, and in the settings that have been most difficult to monitor previously. And it has been now possible to complement, these top-down methods such as satellite-based methods with bottoms-up methods such as, personal exposure monitoring devices, and use them for both short-term to long-term monitoring. And therefore, the exposure response studies of the kind that you saw published using satellite-based data are now being complemented by exposure response studies that are using these alternative methods, personal exposures, microenvironmental data, or ambient air quality monitoring data in rural and urban populations. And the country is also now participating in multi-country studies concerning household air pollution, and shown here is one of the largest such studies that has recently been completed, an intervention, community-level intervention study involving the provision of LPG to biomass-using communities that used a very sophisticated range of exposure assessment methods. And now we have the ability to also deploy low-cost sensors in rural areas. And one of the biggest questions that is coming up is, if you look at at all the costs of low-cost sensing that has been recommended for mapping hyperlocal gradients, and it has now been possible to do that in rural areas and urban areas, what is really the definition of low cost? Compare it to the cost of the satellite-based methods, the low-cost sensor is not really playing out as actually low cost based on experience in India. So the way forward, I think, is, we now have the ability in India and perhaps elsewhere in the world to merge these various exposure data sets. On one hand, you have satellite-based PM2.5, but then you also have the ground-level monitoring network of ambient PM2.5, and we have the ability now to do personal exposure measurements at scale, and then it is now possible to really interface the satellite PM2.5 data sets with all the other data sets that are available, such that we will be able to really reconstruct long-term PM2.5 exposures for various target groups. And shown here is a listing of multiple cohort studies in which this approach is being piloted, and we are hoping to actually document some of these applications in publications very soon. And there is also the ability for the satellite-based methods to really, interface itself with the National Clean Air Program actions, whether it is the expansion program for LPG or whether it is the program for cleaner agricultural technologies that involve that will prevent burning, or whether it is replacement of kerosene lamps that were used previously for lighting with electric lamps or solar lamps, or electric mobility or cleaner brick kiln technologies, name it, and you have now the ability to use the satellite-based data spatially and temporally resolved as the first cut for really maintaining long-term local surveillance. And since health surveillance is already very mature in India, we think that these kinds of hybrid approaches can really set us up well for rolling out the National Clean Air Program, as well as documenting the efficacy of this. So with this, I want to sort of really say that no one approach, whether it is satellite-based methods or the ambient air quality monitoring approaches, are going to be sufficient for us to create seamless, healthy breathing spaces. But it is important to recognize the seamlessness. It is important to recognize the health basis for interventions. We can't be sort of, I think our previous speaker mentioned about how to pitch this prevention, paradigm for air quality actions. And therefore, if you want to look at prevention, then it is really necessary for us to sort of benchmark ourselves against, health-based exposure standards, such as the WHO air quality guidelines or the intermediate guidelines. And without this approach that sort of allows you to sort of really address seamlessness, address the health basis for exposures, address the contribution of multiple sources, and has to be done at scale, both rural and urban. We really need to do this imminently before healthy air, will not be a luxury, but will be a right for everyone everywhere. So thank you so much for this opportunity to share some of my reflections based on what work has been done in India, and I will try to stay on for about 10 minutes or so to answer any important questions, but really appreciate the opportunity to share some of the work that me and my colleagues, in particular grateful thanks to the colleagues who are doing the satellite-based data in IIT Delhi, who have who have made this presentation possible. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Jerry, we would like to first go with the online questions, mindful that we did not get to that with the previous presenter. So, Dr. Kalpana, the first question to you is from Hemraj. They would like to, they're asking about the satellite data, if it's applicable, if this could be applicable to the Himalayas and Tibetan Plateau. They say that the 1 kilometer resolution sounds fantastic. They're planning to do a similar task. And this one is a PhD student from joining us from Hong Kong, but they're from Nepal. So that's the first question. And if you allow me, then I'll also read the second question, which, first, Prof, please go with the first question. I realize the other was for Selela.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there is nothing, special about the 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, for any part of the world. What is really needed is some way to sort of, collect other means of, air quality data, including reference grade monitoring data, to correct for the, the biases that, it is, there is no doubt that the satellite-based data, without ground truthing, without the ambient reference grade monitoring data, doesn't perform as well. And therefore, we have to sort of really make sure that we have that ability to correct the biases that are inherently associated with the measurements of aerosol optical depth by means of appropriate reference grade monitoring methods. It may not be possible to do mount reference grade monitors in the Himalayan region or everywhere in the Tibetan plateau, but what can we do to strategize the ground truthing of the aerosol optical depth data for the inherent biases. I'm sure colleagues, who do the aerosol optical measurement depths will be able to sort of really look at what would be needed in order to ground truth the AOD data in the specific geography that they are looking for, and provide the same kind of highly resolved data for that region as well.
Thank you very much. I do not see any further questions for you, Prof, from online. So, Jerry, how would you like to proceed? Because I would like to then dispose the other questions while we're still having Prof here, but for Selela, which were pending, and then we take it back to the room before we take a coffee break. Is that okay, Jerry?
Yes, you may proceed.
Okay, so Selela, we are calling you back to the podium. You have several questions. The first one is from Jessica. She's asking, is there any framework that seeks to promote public transport to reduce pollutions and they reduce the use of different vehicles that reduces pollution?
Adriana?
That's the first question, Selela. Did you hear me?
Adriana, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I'm sorry, we have to cut you short. Selela has stepped out of the room. So
okay,
I would suggest I take just one question for Prof before she takes off to her next meeting.
Yes, and then from the room, please proceed.
We shall have our tea break and then have the rest of the questions jointly with the next speaker. Thank you. So any burning one for Professor Kalpana? I don't see any hands in the room, so back to you, Adriana. You may take us to our tea break.
Excellent. Before I release Professor, I think it was so important to hear about satellite data, and especially since I've been in rooms where it's promoted almost like a silver bullet for the lack of air quality monitoring, and especially on the continent in Africa. And there was a scoping workshop in the Netherlands last year where we raised several problems that we would have with implementing such a large-scale project in Africa, and the use of tropomi and access to that data, being that there is a lot of commercialization of that satellite data where African countries then could not then afford to access this data. So it's good to hear that India is already very much in the front line of this, and there's opportunity for us on the continent to learn and perhaps exchange ideas on how to go forward with this, given that we have similar challenges. So thank you so much for that presentation. It was very enlightening. So excellent. Professor, any last words to the room before you go?
So thank you again, and we'll be happy to share, more of the publications or any other details, and also help in HEI's efforts on sort of, any kind of hands-on things with real data sets. If that would be helpful, we'll be happy to support in any way we can.
Excellent, Prof. So thank you so much. And with this last remarks, we release you for coffee break. Some of us are at home, so we also run in to go and have a coffee cup. And how many minutes are we coming back in, Jerry?
So with the powers conferred upon us, we shorten it by 10 minutes. So we come back at 11:30.
Excellent. See you at 11:30. Thank you so much for the very, very interactive session. Enjoy your coffee break.
Thank you.
Bye, Prof.
20-minute coffee break, and be back at 11:30 for the last segment of this session before we move to the next session. Thank you.
Sulfur, SOx and NOx and so on. But I've not heard the mention, not with you. I'm talking about now about ourselves, not with us, with all of us, about the suspension of bacteria and fungi spores in the atmosphere. We could be thinking that it's PM10 that is causing respiratory problems, and yet those are biological issues. Then you mentioned the meteorological. I think that is also another thing I've not heard from all of us. Meteorology has a big role to play in air pollution concentrations in a particular area. You could be generating it in A, and you find a lot of it in B where there is no generation of air pollution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for your great participation in this. The quick takeaways from that useful and quite lengthy session. As you can see, I turned down quite a number of hands in the interest of time, but I believe we should still be able to take this conversation among ourselves forward. Quick takeaways from my side before I hand it over to you, Adriana. One, I think there is consensus from all the three presenters that air quality related actions are actually needed, and needed urgently, and that all relevant stakeholders need to be involved in these processes. Collaborations, this has been said over and over, are key. For the Global South and Africa for that matter, learning by doing is key, and that we need not wait for best evidence. Let's start and work with what we have. And also that awareness among our populace is key to ensuring these actions result in meaningful outcomes. Over to you, Adriana, to close it.
Thank you very much, Jerry. And at first, I would like to thank our very able speakers, Selela, Jennifer, and Prof. Kapana. That was a very insightful, very exciting session. And for us online and those in the room, we sincerely thank you. From my side, I think it's just to add on to Jerry, what Jerry has said. It's quite clear that policy making is not a straight line. It's not something you conceive because you identify a challenge and you end up with a solution and then it's implemented. Sometimes that process starts, stops, but then you find other avenues to continue so that you can get to the end point, which is to have that policy, but also the very important aspect of implementation is still a challenge, but we progress. I think the other key takeaway for us from this session was that participation of all key stakeholders in this policy-making process is very important, and one that not only just the policy-making process, but also the implementation. The third one, and not the least, is that more than just implementing policies on air quality, there's also consideration of the sectorial impact, both in terms of contribution, but also mitigating air pollution. But critically, being reminded again that you need to integrate air pollution with other aspects such as climate change and development, livelihoods, and job creation, for example, depending on who you're talking to as a group, but also because these things matter to us as a region, as East Africa, as a continent, and to the world. So I'm very mindful that we have run over time on our session, so I'll stop here. And once again, thank you and ask you to put your hands together and clap at the end of the session. Thank you very much. Over to you, Jerry.
Now I'll hand it over to Pallavi, who will steer us in the next session.